Welcome to The Source, where we combine the headlines with in-depth conversations with the newsmakers themselves. I'm Pinky Webb. Today on the program, Vice President Leni Robredo denies breaking the chain of command and giving orders to the military during the onslaught of Typhoon Ulysses. The Vice President insists she is not competing with the President. But Malacañang says the President may have had his reasons to lash out at the Vice President. And amid the recent massive floodings and calamities, is it about time to create a Department of Disaster Resilience? Senate Minority Leader Franklin Drilon joins us live. Vice President Leni Robredo remains unbothered by the latest tirade of President Rodrigo Duterte against her. Speaking to the media in Camarines Sur, Robredo says she did not ask the president's whereabouts during the recent typhoons. In his late-night address Tuesday, President Duterte accused Robredo of lying, claiming that the vice president made it appear that he was missing in action during the recent typhoons. CNN Philippines reviewed the events and found that Robredo did not use the hashtag Nasaan ang Pangulo or even asked where the president was. Let's go straight to the source of the story. We have Senate Minority Leader Franklin Drilon. Senator Drilon, welcome to the source and thank you for your time, Senator.
Thank you, Pinky, for inviting me this morning.
I want to start with this. Were you surprised with the president's tirade against Vice President Leni Robredo?
I'm no longer surprised. I've been on the receiving end in the past. Also, when I was at the start and the end of the SONA, if you remember, and that's why I was not surprised. This is, but what saddens me is that number one, the statements of the president were based on information which turned out to be inaccurate. And number two, insofar as the vice president is concerned, indeed, she did not use any government facility. Third point, Pinky, I think it is our people needs a unified leadership. And yes, I am the vice chairman to Leni Robredo in the Liberal Party, but we would like to appeal to everyone, the president and vice president. At this time, let's have a unified voice. Our people needs the undivided attention of the government. Politics can come later, if we must say. But right now, given the extent of the damage, Pinky, and the extent of the needs of our people, right now we're talking about the budget, and that is why there is a need for a united leadership at this point.
Let's talk about those three things you mentioned, Senator Drilon. Inaccurate. The vice president already said she never asked where the president was. CNN also checked that and looked at all her social media posts, and she never asked where the president was either. When I asked Secretary Roque kung saan posibleng nanggaling ito o ano kaya ang narinig ng Pangulo, basically he said that he really didn't know particularly where this came from, but ang sabi niya kasi siguro napuno na ang Pangulo. And he even added that at some point, the vice president made it appear that she was in control or in command of the situation. So what are your thoughts on that? Does that become very subjective?
Well, apparently, I would like to think that on the basis of what I have read, it is based on an erroneous report coming from the Philippine Air Force, and that what picked the president. It's quite obvious. To me, Pinky, we can put that behind us now. Secretary Lorenzana and Secretary Panelo have apologized for the wrong information, which apparently they fed to the president. And they have apologized. The vice president has denied making those statements. And let us try to move forward. As I would repeat, our people needs undivided attention at this point.
Okay, that's very important. But I just want to find out also from you, at least with regards to the responsibilities of the vice president. She has been called, or not just her, the vice president, has been called a spare tire. Secretary did not mince words, and he did say that she is a spare tire. Pero ang akin lang po, Senator Drilon, dahil nga sabi mo it's time to unite, and most importantly, of course, to help our kababayans in a situation, sir, where the vice president is deemed as a spare tire, but she has goods, she needs help, she wants to distribute relief, she wants to do relief work and distribute goods. Meron ho kayang paraan para matulungan ang vice president na maabot yung mga tao ding humihingi ng tulong sa kanya at yung po mga taong nagbibigay ng tulong sa vice president?
Well, the vice president, that the vice president is a spare tire is completely immaterial. All of us, whether you are the president, the vice president, or senator, congressman, etc., or an ordinary citizen, your help is needed by our millions of unfortunate brothers and sisters in the calamity hit areas. Yes, in our political, in our setup, indeed the vice president is a spare tire, because if the president would not give him or her any post in the cabinet, then really she just waits for some event in order that she can assume the presidency under our constitution. But having said that, it's completely immaterial to the help needed by our people. You do not have to be a vice president. Yes, there are no particular function assigned by the president to the vice president. That is the prerogative of the president, but that is not material to the help that the vice president is doing in the calamity areas, because indeed, I know for a fact that the president vice president is doing more than what is required of her, herself generating help from the private sector in order to help our kababayans. So again, I would repeat, it's unfortunate that this statement has been made. It is completely immaterial and uncalled for.
Mm-hmm. You talked about you also, at some point, I think it was during the SONA, if I'm not mistaken, Senator Drilon, when this talk about oligarchs and political dynasties came up. And you were at the receiving end of the president's irritation, as well as you mentioned a while ago. Here's the thing, Senator, with something like that, and the vice president also at the receiving end of the president's anger, irritation, disappointment, how does this need to be resolved? Number one, between the two leaders, kailangan ho bang resolbahin ito, or pabayaan na lang po and continue on with their respective jobs?
Well, I think the latter would be needed by our people. Responses have been made. Vice President Robredo the president acted on wrong information of his subordinates. Whether or not his subordinates did that maliciously, I do not know. I don't think that they did, but they certainly acted on erroneous information. And they have apologized. I think we go back and focus ourselves to the relief operations. And on my part, we have to rush the budget so that we will not be the people and the nation will not be prejudiced by a delayed budget. It is a very critical piece of legislation. More than any other time in the past, I think the budget for next year is very important, given the three calamities that just passed us, and the continuing problem on COVID-19. Pinky.
Senator, we need to take a very short break. The source will be right back. You're watching The Source on CNN Philippines. Our guest today, Senate Minority Leader Franklin Drilon. Senator, a lot of things have come up because of what happened because of the recent typhoons. One is, number one, well, the first rather would be a probe on the flooding that happened in Cagayan and Isabela. Number two would be the task force that will now be headed by the DENR and the DPWH, and of course the Department of Resilience, of Disaster Resilience. Let's start first very quickly on the probe on flooding. Is this what is your stand on this? When will this happen, and how important should you get into why this happened in Cagayan and Isabela?
Yes, I support the proposition that we find out if there were lapses because there are supposed to be protocols among the different agencies which are involved in water management. You have the National Irrigation Authority, you have the Water Board, you have the MWSS, and you have the private sector. Yes, I am in favor of an inquiry so that we can have a better coordination, maybe a better protocols can be crafted so that there is better coordination among these agencies, because the water is a very important resource, and the government agencies should be on top of the situation when we have something like this. We do not know at this point whether there was in fact coordination, and in that point, I support the call for an investigation. In the Senate, we will finish as soon as we finish the budget, which should be this week or next week. We should, the majority leader has proposed that we inquire into this, and I support that call for an inquiry.
Would it be wise, rather, Senator, to find somehow, I don't know if the word is streamline or simplify the issue on water? Because even as you mentioned a while ago, there's so many agencies involved. Granted, they have different tasks, but sometimes it's as if we're unsure where the responsibility lies on certain things that may happen.
Well, yes, there is need for better coordination. And Pinky, remember, during my time as executive secretary, and we really monitored closely events such as this, because in our setup and by our culture, we need the office of the president as the pivot office that will oversee and direct the all matters related to this. And that is why I am in favor of strengthening the office of the civil defense and strengthening the body. I am opposed to having a department, but yes, there is a need for better coordination. Although, Pinky, I must assert that in the past, this issue never came up. The issue of, I would like either there was no similar incident, I can't remember anymore, but certainly I don't remember that this has become an issue whenever there are typhoons and calamities. Before the Office of Civil Defense is under the Department of National Defense, and always the D&D secretary is called up, is the one that is pointed to, because the assets needed would be in the Department of National Defense. But let us review the situation. I'm talking about the time when I was executive secretary, 30 years ago. Let's review it.
Yeah. So let's go to the task force that will be headed by Secretary Villar and Secretary Simatu. Is this a good idea?
Well, they must have the full support the Office of the Executive Secretary. Task forces, Pinky, in my view, is a very difficult setup. Why? Because a task force would need resources, and the resources are in the line departments. Now, in this particular case, the two cabinet secretaries, which are considered as very efficient and no questions about their integrity, they have the resources. Maybe it will work. But as long as they are given that appropriate authority, because they will be calling upon the different cabinet members and the different offices and tapping on the resources of these agencies and putting them in part of the command structure. That is why they must be clothed with the proper authority. Otherwise, it will not work. There were instances in the past when task forces were created, and in fact, the task force was not headed by a cabinet secretary, and that was a problem because the head of the task force would have to cajole and would have to talk to different departments where the funds are, and the departments are the one responsible for liquidation, and therefore there is always reluctance to allow or to give the power over the resources to the task force chair, because they are responsible for liquidating this. I mean, the line secretaries. So by human nature, you place all kinds of safeguards para hindi ka naman masabit sa COA. And precisely because of this, many instances the task force would fail. But in this particular case, the two secretaries, DPWH and DNR, would have the resources of their two departments under their command, and they have a better chance of succeeding than a situation where the task force czar is not one of the secretaries. And that is why I am even advocating that in very serious situations where you put a task force, you have it headed by the executive secretary, who would have the power of the president behind him and can command all the departments. He is the primus inter pares. But not if not the executive secretary, the task force headed by the DPWH and the DNR, to me, has a better chance of succeeding because they have the resources in their departments.
But of course, we do know, Senator Drilon, that initially that it was supposed to be headed by Executive Secretary Medialdea, and this was amended or changed, and it's co-chaired now by the two secretaries, DENR and DPWH.
That's correct. As I said, you correctly stated, it was headed initially by the Office of the Department Secretary, but they have decided that it should be the DNR and the DPWH. Well, the most ideal would have been the Executive Secretary, in my view. But the designation with two gentlemen with the resources of the departments behind them and under their command, there's a good chance that they would succeed. But let me point out, Pinky, as I said, this was not an issue before. Why is it an issue now? I recall during the time of President Cory, when I was the executive secretary, there were very serious calamities that confronted the country. The Secretary of National Defense, Secretary Fidel Ramos, being the secretary of the department where the Office of the Civil Defense was attached, immediately went into action and was able to harness the various departments so that we were able to adequately address the needs of our people. It was very clear that Fidel, the former President Ramos, as Secretary of National Defense, was on top of the situation.
So just very quickly, because I need to go on a break, Senator, do you think nagkulang po si Defense Secretary Delfin Lorenzana?
I would not pass that judgment, but certainly, the Office of the Civil Defense is under him. Secretary Lorenzana is one of the more respected and perceived to be to have integrity and efficiency in the in the cabinet. Maybe a projection of what he was doing could have given our people more comfort that the Office of the Civil Defense and the INDREM undersecretaries are up to the task. Baka po kulang lang sa communication.
So that's where I was going to go. I was going to ask you, kulang ho ba sa communication, which you answered. Senator, we need to take another short break. The Source will be right back. Welcome back to The Source. President Rodrigo Duterte has been calling for the formation of this Department of Disaster Resilience. And from my understanding, Senator Franklin Drilon, you are against this.
That's correct. What we need today would be additional calamity funds, not additional cabinet members. Because once you form a department, you have a secretary, you have an undersecretary or undersecretaries, assistant secretaries, bureau directors, regional directors, assistant directors. Each department would cost at least 1.5 billion pesos to set up. And right now, Pinky, there are at least 7 bills in the Senate calling for the formation of this of 7 different departments. On the other hand, our calamity funds for this year is only 16 billion, and next year the budget is 20 billion. And certainly, I do not see the need for a department of whatever this is, disaster resilience.
Disaster resilience.
Pinky, we have 1.8 million employees in the national government, not counting the local government employees. The government is the biggest single employer in this country. And that is why, given our limited resources, our budget for salary is eating everything. In the current year, we have, hold your chair, 1.184 trillion pesos in payroll. Next year, this will go up to 1 trillion, 316 billion. So really, we must rationalize our bureaucracy. I support the bill of the Senate President Tito Soto, which calls for a review and a reorganization and a rationalization of our personnel structure. That's Senate Bill number 244. Indeed, we should take a look at this before we go again working or seeking the formation of new departments. We're talking about the budget in the Senate today, and we notice that the allocation for capital outlay, which is so critical in moving our economy, is so insufficient. But there's a lot of allocation for the allocation for salary for next year is 1.316 trillion. So there is. I'm not opposed to any particular department, but let us approach this on a more rationally, and that is why the proposition of the Senate President, which I support, is that we must first look at our entire bureaucracy, look at what we have, pass a law to rationalize our bureaucracy by passing Senate Bill 244 before we again talk about creating new departments. As they say, if ain't broke, why fix it? So
why fix it?
let us.
All right.
This is my position.
Senator, I have 1 minute left. I wanted to get your reaction briefly on this. So, the camp of Vice President Leni Robredo already filed a motion before the Presidential Electoral Tribunal to look into this possible collusion between the camp of former Senator Bongbong Marcos and Soljan Calida. Of course, this has something to do with a motion filed for the inhibition of Associate Justice Marvic Leon. And my question to you, Senator, is do you see a possible collusion between the camp of former Senator Bongbong Marcos and the Office of the Solicitor General?
I have no information on that, but this matter is pending in the Supreme Court, and the protest is pending before the Presidential Electoral Tribunal. Yesterday, I read in media that the Supreme Court has required the Solicitor General to comment
Yeah.
on a
Why he should
contempt
not be.
charge. So
Right.
it's best that this matter be left to the Supreme Court, before whom the case is pending, and who would have the power to look and inquire into this.
Senator Franklin Drilon, Minority Leader. Sir, thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure, Pinky. Thank you for inviting me, and I do hope to see you sometime in the future.
Thank you, sir. Take care of yourself. And thank you for joining us here on The Source. I'm Pinky Webb. You're watching CNN Philippines.